The Holy Roman Empire, at times a forgotten and misunderstood land, whose perhaps most recognizable form came in that of a loose conglomeration of grossly Germanic states. It's an empire which owes its origins to not one but two kings who would come to define the character and status of the empire as really neither holy nor Roman. First came the Frankish king Charlemagne, who expanded his domain from that of modern-day France and the Netherlands to encompass the whole of Germany, Austria, northern Italy, and further lands to the east, Christianizing the Saxons and assuming the title Emperor of the Romans under the authority of the Pope, a rank which would essentially be on par with that of the Byzantine Emperor, leading several to suggest that Charlemagne's rise may have signaled the revival of the Western Roman Empire. However, in his passing so did expansion halt, and so did the empire fragment into the realms of West, East, and Middle Francia, which would later on form the foundations of French, German, Benelux, and distinct northern Italian cultures as we know them today. But before that time came, another king would rise to define the Holy Roman Empire of the German nation, as it would then be known. That king would be Otto I, better known as Otto the Great, son of Henry the Fowler, a previous king who had established a decentralized monarchy of federated duchies in a play to unite the German tribes first under said system and then under a mutually supported emperor. Otto would have inherited his father's task of German unification, as well as his foes the Magyars, or the pagan Hungarian clans, whom he would later defeat. Otto, as opposed to his father's democratic tactics, would move to centralize power seemingly through layers of policy and favoritism, first installing members of his own family in East Francia's dominant duchies, while siphoning power away from the aristocracy into that of the king, notably demoting the roles of dukes and the clergy, who were previously on equal authority to the king, but now relegated to the level of noble subjects. Otto's ambitious power-grabbing, as one might expect, triggered a rebellion among the dukes, something which would give Otto all the justification he needed to exercise total supremacy over the land, dismissing the orders of the dukes, removing and appointing based on loyalty and strategy alone, whilst arranging marriages and succession lines to ensure one of his sons became the Duke of Swabia, his brother the Duke of Bavaria, and his nephew the King of France, an arrangement which would solidify for the kingdom an era of sustaining unity and relative prosperity. Otto would later expand into Italy following a marriage proposal by Adeline of Burgundy and the initiation of conflict in the region by his son, the Duke of Swabia. Otto's son's actions would prove to be a humiliation upon the kingdom, leading initially to estrangement and later a succession war, as Otto planned to name his son with Adeline as his new heir in place of his now estranged son. The civil war would be resolved in a truce just years before Otto would be made to return to Italy to liberate the Papal States from invasion, and in doing so earning himself the title of Holy Roman Emperor, one which would also be inherited by his son Otto II, and which over time would come to symbolize not only the protector of the Roman Catholic faith, but the leader of the German people. That's the general gist of the Holy Roman Empire in its heyday, a centralized militant power bent on uniting the Germanic world through strong-handed means. Perhaps when put in that context it seems a lot like another German Reich of more recent memory, and so it'd be of little surprise then that the National Socialists, Hitler in particular, drew a fair deal of inspiration from the First Reich, hence the origin of the term Third Reich, with the Empire of the Kaiser being the second and the Holy Roman Empire being recognized as the very first of the German empires, which, curiously enough, did share several parallels to its successors, and so for this alternate scenario, we'll be proposing what if the Holy Roman Empire had adopted National Socialism. A little unorthodox and certainly far from the realm of possibility, but perhaps not too difficult to do based upon the foundations we'll be working off of, and if nothing else this might serve as a fine concept for what if the Holy Roman Empire remained united. We'll suggest that following Otto's passing, his successor Otto II begins the implementation of a system eerily similar to National Socialism, and it's important to emphasize similar as the ideology will need to be slightly modified for the time. Perhaps instead of a biological basis for the ideal of a master race, Otto might utilize divine scripture and mythology to term the Germans as a holy or chosen people, claiming descendants from an advanced pre-Roman society in Hyperborea or Thule, and establishing a church dedicated to investigating as well as protecting this holy history of the Germanic people. Following a rebellion by the Bavarian line of succession, Otto would use this as an excuse to restructure the social classes and power hierarchy more in line with those of the National Socialist system, creating more cooperative social ranks in which educated nobles retained their standing, while more skilled peasants were given greater recognition and authority in their communities, potentially earning greater representation in the Reichstag, then at the time being the imperial diet of negotiation. It'd be a strict meritocratic system, but of course exclusive to those of evident German descent, and only those most loyal would be granted movement into positions of any significant authority. This would go hand in hand with a process of broad Germanization and total centralization, breaking down the sense of separatism within the individual principalities to unite them into a singular Germanic culture and state, appealing to images and motifs of a shared past to help solidify this integration, as well as censoring or muddying stories or items which could have evoked conflict and sectional nationalism between the various cultures in an attempt to prevent the HRE from fracturing as it later had in our own world. Just as the National Socialists of our world, however, attempts to preserve the diversity of German culture would be made, as was hoped to be done with the Netherlands, Scandinavia, and Austria, through the maintaining of certain non-threatening aspects of the present culture, though not including language, politics, or philosophy. Foreign non-Germanic cultures would be suppressed, expelled, or made autonomous, as these groups would be perceived as incapable of integrating into the unitary identity for lack of a deeply shared history. These policies would especially apply to northern Italy and portions of the East. The northern Italians, recognized as being ethnically German but linguistically and culturally Italic, would be made to speak only the imperial language and embrace the blending of their culture with that of the northern Germans, while much of their territory was incorporated into the new nation-state, leaving only those closest to the south to retain their culture and traditions but remain subject to imperial demands. Christianity would be strongly enforced by the empire, though the power of the Roman Catholic Church would be steadily siphoned into the emperor to earn him authority as both a defender of the faith and a divinely appointed leader. Heavy militarization is taken up with the incentive of peasants being able to move up the hierarchy for demonstration of exceptional skill and duty to the German people. In our world, the military of the Holy Roman Empire and the army of the emperor were two separate entities, the former of which lacked consistent organization, being that it was based upon the alliances of the principalities and their own individual training styles, additionally being unable to proceed to action without the agreement of the imperial diet. At the same time, the latter, being the emperor's army, required the recruiting efforts of the empire's administrators, and lacked the combined strength that the totality of the empire had to offer. In this alternate world, that's different. A quota of enlistment is set forth to each respective duchy, principality, and city for a select number of men based upon a fraction of their own populations, punishing lack of cooperation with a raising of taxes and denial of collective security ensured by the joint army. This could, for particularly rebellious and resistant German groups, mean total annihilation, resettlement, and replacement by the collective German state as a means to weed out weaker elements. The collective German army's main goals would be twofold. Firstly, to enforce order within the new German Empire, and secondly, to expand north and eastward into the territories dominated by the pagan Nordic and Slavic tribes. Duty, loyalty, and conformity to the German Volk would be encouraged through an intertwining of the ideology into the far-spread Christian faith. This would of course create a greater rift between the Empire and the Papacy, which may further the schism not merely along eastern and western lines, but along northern lines as well, leading to the rise of East Orthodoxy for Byzantium, Roman Catholicism for Rome, and now Germanic Christianity for Germania. And though international divides would grow, this, along with the replacement of feudal systems, would ensure the Holy Roman Empire, or rather now just the German Empire, would avoid its own internal divisions in the near future. This intertwining of the ideology with the faith and systems of the time really works well, as National Socialism had functioned not merely as a political system, but also as a personal philosophy which entailed things such as natalism and respect for nature as a means to not only preserve a people, but the environment which produced them. It was also a philosophy which demanded through strict dogma the utmost discipline and dedication to the collective nation, along with a violent rejection of vices and contrary ideals, essentially creating for this alternate empire a faith with several levels of protective measures to ensure its continuity and domination, as those out of line with the system would be swiftly removed by the collective group, while followers of the philosophy were encouraged to produce larger families to enrich the nation and the state. Now, during the previous rule of Otto the Great, the Kingdom of Denmark had become a subject of the Holy Roman Empire and converted to Christianity. However, since then had acquired the territories of Norway and now believed itself capable of fending off the Germans. As in our own world, the Danes would be defeated, and their lands would now be annexed into this greater Germany because of Otto's pan-German ambitions. Norway too would be an alluring target for him, although he may not live to see it under German rule. As in our world, he would have contracted malaria and died only 10 years into his reign, succeeded by his son Otto III, who at the time would have only been 3 years old. For the sake of this scenario, and preventing a collapse of this still new system, we'll propose that Otto survive long enough to see these efforts in Norway through. The campaign in the north would strain imperial forces and demand that Norway focus all its efforts on repelling the invasion. Unlike Denmark, Norway would not fall so easily, having the advantage of both remnant Danish warriors and a geographic disconnect from the imperial mainland. The Germans would ultimately be repelled for the time being, though Denmark was seemingly lost. It would have also been the year of Otto's illness in our world that the Great Slav Rising would take place, a conflict which would have successfully forced the Germans past the Elbe River, halting Christianization of the region and ending the empire's eastward expansion for 2 centuries. In this alternate world, instead of merely being met by a lone ragtag Saxon army, the Slavs are met with a tight regiment of soldiers from across the Holy Roman Empire, who successfully managed to repel the Slavs and drive them back to the Baltic coast and realm of the Kievan Rus. Following the failed invasion of Norway, the German Empire would turn its sights to England and Normandy, England bearing a predominant Anglo-Saxon population, while the Normans with their Nordic ancestry and religious fervor would be viewed as potential allies. However, the Normans had previously sworn loyalty to France, and in doing so long adopted the Roman Catholic faith, which, following the schism, would have made them adamant foes of Germany. The Anglo-Saxons of England, on the other hand, had long endured incursions from the Vikings and now the Normans. If we assume support from Germany could turn the tides of the Norman invasion, what follows in post-invasion England could be the forced integration of its internal feuding Germanic factions into an autonomous but heavily assimilated Germanic kingdom. As the continental Germans had done to the neighboring Slavs and Hungarians, so would the English do to Wales and Scotland, driving the Scots to the far reaches of the north where they'd find security with Norwegian Vikings, while the Welsh were essentially wiped out in their small corner of the island, few managing to sail away to Ireland and establish a remnant society there. The Normans, left without England, retained Normandy as their main base of operations and shift ambitions of expansion elsewhere. Relations between Germania and Rome would come to a boiling point as the Pope openly denounced the Germanic leader. Understanding that losing the title in this manner may cost him significant support, the Emperor would set upon an Italian campaign to overthrow the Pope and install his own successor to recrown him divine leader of all Germans, so that he may finally separate himself from the legacy of Rome and create his own. Following this quick defeat, a great animosity would arise between the Catholic and Germanic powers of Europe, most especially led by a Norman-Roman alliance which perceived the Germanic Empire as a threat to the survival of both the Church and any empire whose land might be considered rightfully German. France would also take interest in claiming the territory of Burgundy for itself, driving it into direct conflict with the Germans, often with the aid of the Normans close behind them. The Scandinavian nations resist pushes for Christianization and integration to the Germanic Empire, coming to perceive them as destructive to the Norse way of life. Norway and Sweden would come together as an anti-German force, at times collaborating with the Catholic powers in various efforts to halt German expansion or to chisel away at its domains. By this point, the Byzantines would be dwindling, and their possessions would quickly fall to the Catholics. The German Empire's eastern expansion would continue until it was eventually met by the incoming Mongol horde, which would leave the imperial power combating foes in a multi-front war. The Catholics in the south and west, the Norse in the north, and now the Mongols in the east. In this time, the Catholic powers would have gained significant ground, the Papal States taking the region of Venice with Norman support, whilst a reconquest of the British coast was mounted from Normandy. France as well would advance past the German border, but as quickly as these victories had been brought, so would they be cut short as the weakening Mongol front allowed Germany and its brief ally of Hungary to turn their attention back west. But yet again, further trouble would arise for all parties, as the Black Plague took its hold over the continent soon after. Seeing the collapse of armies, the loss of intellectuals and skilled laborers, the withering of unity for many states, and a general cynicism now ripe in the public mind. While no population was spared, those dependent upon trade and most densely populated received the worst of its effects as cities became deserted and crops went unharvested, while markets which once brought wealth and wonder from far-off lands now served as nodes for the spread of the disease. This would be the case for Germany and France in particular. The plague's effects upon the psychology of the general populace would also lead several into the sole pursuit of pleasure, even in spite of morality and restraint. In Germany, this degenerate behavior would be punished the most severely as attempts were made to maintain civility in the face of this catastrophe. And following cases of individuals surviving the plague or resisting its infection through biological immunity, an idea would be produced of salvation from the plague through divine selection or purity of lineage to the ancient Germanic people, reinforcing that the disease was a punishment for those who were weak and not truly loyal to the Volk. While many latched onto the ideal, those who ridiculed or rejected the proposition would be publicly executed as a means to reinforce compliance among the population. Belief would be challenged each time a noble or a ruler fell ill, and each time a seemingly good man was made to suffer the throes of the contagion. However, in passing, the plague would have left those who remained more zealous than ever, and in fact individuals on average would enjoy longer lives in the post-plague era on account of greater resource supply and the effects of natural selection, something which would no doubt reassure the Germans of all they believed in, and help along the restabilization process. Despite the endurance of the German people, the empire would still suffer tremendous setbacks from the prior years, having seen both western and eastern lands break off to either become their own states or join with another empire. By the early 1400s, the empire of the German nation would have reclaimed lost coastal territories from France, but lost several abandoned or underpopulated urban territories to its western rival. The Normans, following a union with the Papal States, would assume the old title of Holy Roman Empire, overseeing a domain which reached from the Atlantic Ocean to the Mediterranean Sea, protecting lands as far off as Jerusalem. The Norse would have set about establishing their own empire as a counterweight to Germanic and Catholic Europe, the Scandinavian nation being the sole bastion of paganism on the continent, following the conversion of the Hungarians at the hands of Germany some decades prior. But the Norse faith would not remain exclusive to Europe for very long, as portions of the New World returned stories of increasing promise for the Norse explorers who continued venturing westward. The Ottomans would have begun their expansion into the Balkans but failed to retain Greece, which would have fallen under the stricter protection of the Holy Norman Empire. Hungary may find itself in a more vulnerable state if left without German support, who would likely bear the greatest responsibility in combating the Ottoman expansion, which would once again leave it subject to incursions by the Catholic powers, who the Ottomans may play against the Germans, and vice versa, for their own benefit. And that is where I'll end this video for now. The US of Z thanks you for watching. You can pick up a copy of our novel I Am Uncle Sam in the links below, support your Legion by liking the video, or join our ranks by subscribing for more. Mr. Z, out.